Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. I'm really enjoying this. I wish we had all day to keep hearing from all of these use cases because I am learning so much and I'm writing down so many notes. So I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about our boater app, which specifically for recreational boaters. After the Tuna Fishers app was released in 2013 and we're doing some engagement, got some feedback, we recognized that there were pieces of information and tools that people needed that weren't necessarily on the boater or on the Tuna Fishers app yet. So recreational boaters specifically need information about a destination. They might just be going out on the water, not particularly interested necessarily to catch fish, but they need to get where they're going safely. And so we started developing this boater specific application that had a lot of the same information as the Tuna Fishers app to stay safe on the water, navigation, but then we also included things like destination, developed the routing capabilities, which then got, as Mark mentioned, then added to the Tuna Fishers app. So I know I've spoken with a few of you on the workshop right now, so you've heard me talk at length about the Boaters app. So instead, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Pommert, who is a NASBLA certified safe boating instructor, and she is going to describe a little bit about how she uses the Boaters app. So Margaret, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Rachel mentioned, I'm a safe boating instructor. I'm also VP for Safety at Sea for the Sailing Foundation, which is a 5031c, a nonprofit whose mission is to promote boating in the Pacific Northwest. And so I come in as someone who is a newer user of this, and good news, bad news. So the good news is, I was telling Rachel, you know, I come in with the eyes of what is a newer boater or somebody newer to use. I'm not a new boater. What is somebody newer to use in the app experience? So thank you. Yeah, if we go forward into the next slide. So about me, I am both a sailing instructor and a powerboating instructor here in the Pacific Northwest. I teach for a number of the groups around the Pacific Northwest, particularly charter companies. So San Juan Sailing, Windworks, Seattle Sailing Club, a lot of the different sailing and powerboating charter companies. And so these are oftentimes newer boaters. And so the concept is, what do we want to communicate to them and to the larger boating community in terms of safety around weather and where are the opportunities. I'm also a navigation instructor, but also I come in this with my background. I spent 25 years as a business consultant with IBM, and for 25 years, what I focused on was I designed dashboards for businesses. And what does that mean? That means that I went in and met with executives to understand what drove their business, what their key metrics were that they needed to monitor in order to manage their business, and then designed a dashboard in terms of the visualization. What did the measurements look like? And kind of wrote up the requirements, and then I threw it over the wall to technical people, you know, computer geeks, to actually make it happen. So as Rachel knows, I come into this with that background as well, in terms of I have strong opinions about how information should be presented to a user and the process that you go through. So I'm coming in wearing a little bit of both of those hats. So we can go to the next slide. So I just did a quick app, or a quick survey. Among other things that I do, I run the local Women Who Sail and Power Cruise Pacific Northwest Facebook page, which is 2,600 members strong. And I did a quick survey because I was like, hey, how many people know of the Boaters app? And you see, most of them had not heard of them. A few of them had used it, but I think there's definitely an opportunity, and I'm thrilled to help get the word out about this, and I'll be scheduling more things with Rachel to get the word out to a variety of communities I'm involved in. So we can go to the next one. In order to do that, and I think we're all on the same page here, I think to get the word out more to the community, having use cases is really the way to go. In other words, don't, that we won't come forward and say we've got a tool, because people are going to go, oh, that's nice, you got a tool. Come forward and say, that problem that you have, that you worry about, we have a way that you can solve that problem with this tool, and that will get people's interest. So what do recreational sail and power boaters typically, interested in this area? Well, sailors are certainly concerned about the wind. Do we have too much wind, too little wind? Which directions are coming from? How strong are the gusts? Sailors also are concerned about current, because sailboats don't travel that fast. So, in Puget Sound, with the strength of our current, it can be a big difference of planning your trip if the current is going to be with you or against you. And then also waves. The comfort and safety of waves are both in interest to sailors. There are a few other things there that are maybe secondary concerns or other things. Air temperature. Oftentimes, sailors or many people have sources of that information from other areas. Water temperature, sailors, unlike fishermen, are not so concerned about it, but it is a safety thing. In terms of if someone goes overboard in our waters, our cold waters are a factor. And then power boaters, what are power boaters concerned about? They're also concerned about current, even though the power boats tend to go faster, especially as fuel prices go up. Power boaters are becoming more and more aware of, hey, if they could figure out, if they're trying to get from Seattle to the San Juans, if they can figure out how to take advantage of the currents, that can save them a significant chunk of change. And power boaters also concerned about waves for comfort and safety. So for example, in the scenario of going from Seattle to the San Juan Islands and crossing the Straits of Juan de Fuca, knowing when is going to be a comfortable time to cross the Straits of Juan de Fuca, it's a comfort issue. It's also it's a bit of a safety issue, because many power boaters have found that when they're in rough seas, the rough seas stir up the sediment in the bottom of the tank, the fuel tank. That sediment, especially on their diesel engine, gets sucked up and stops the diesel engine, right in the middle of the rough seas in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and makes them even less happy. So, and likewise, going down the coast. So these are some of the things that recreational boaters are interested in. Not a complete list, but just a starting point. So if we go to the next slide, and they're also concerned about not running aground. So understanding tides and currents is important too. And the next slide. I find in teaching newer recreational boaters in Puget Sound that they really underestimate the complexity of both our weather and our tides. I used to teach in Southern California. Down there, the direction of the wind was pretty easy to understand. The direction of the tides and the currents, pretty easy to understand. Puget Sound is just a lot more complicated, and so I find that a lot of newer boaters just don't understand that complexity. So one of the things that I use this for is a teaching tool. So if we go to the next slide. So here's an example. I teach a marine weather class with someone who's a meteorologist. I am not a meteorologist by any stretch of the imagination. I come in as the person who teaches the advanced boating classes, and so I work with the meteorologist to teach this class. So here's an example of how I used this in the class. So we were talking about how the correlation between barometric pressure and wind direction, and so I teaching the class on Zoom. I brought this up. Now, one of the challenges, or one of the things in using the app, is that the familiar units that we use, at least in recreational boating, to talk about pressure, were different from the default. And so I was kind of, and also, if you look there on the left, you see that if I have the pressure in inches, it's only 3 significant digits. And so it looks like the pressure is the same all up and down, but switching it over to millibars was a more familiar measurement that we've been teaching. Also gave me 4 significant digits, so I could show a little bit of difference in the pressure between the North and South Sound. So then if we go to the next slide, then I could bring up the representation of the wind direction next to it. And this may not be the best example. This just happened to be the example when I put this together. I could ask the students, well, based on the barometric pressure, which direction would you expect the wind to be blowing? As we've talked about how geography affects wind. And so I'm using the tool a lot just as a teaching aid in classes to help people kind of understand the concepts of kind of the complexity of our environment as a boater. So if we go to the next slide, I'll also use it as we're having, so I teach boating safety. And one of the things in teaching boating safety in the Pacific Northwest is, especially to newer boaters, a lot of them don't appreciate the fact that even during the summer when our air temperatures can be pretty warm and our lakes can be warm, that Puget Sound is never warm. It's just how cold it's going to be. And so bringing up a representation of the water temperatures and talking about cold water shock when somebody falls off a boat into our cold waters, how their body might respond to that. So again, I'm kind of using it as a tool for teaching education to talk about the realities of our environment and make it real to our environment. If we go to the next slide. I mentioned that one thing that's of common interest to both sailors and power boaters, especially in places like the Straits of Juan de Fuca or off our coast, is the wave height and the wave direction. So I'll use it in these classes to talk about where can you get information to find out about wave height and wave direction. And so here's an example of what comes up initially if you hit the filter for wave height. There's a site there in Port Angeles. Then if we go forward to the next slide, I'll point out that in using the app, they need to know that they can also pick individual platforms to get more wave information. So as we talk about the direction and height of the waves, to kind of give them a basic introduction to the tool, to say, hey, there's actually a buoy there that will give you information on the wave height and wave direction for the area that they're probably interested in. Because if they're crossing from Port Townsend, say up to Victoria or Friday Harbor, that would tell them the height and direction of the waves. Then if we go to the next slide, also again, so using it from a teaching standpoint, one of the common questions that beginner boaters will ask is they'll say, are the waves big in the strait? Are the waves big in the Straits of Juan de Fuca today? And big is all relative. So to help them develop an understanding of, is this bigger than the last time? Is this bigger than the normal? Showing them how to use the plots of the history of the waves or the wind. So this is actually a representation of the wind. So people will say, well, is it windy in the Straits of Juan de Fuca today? Because I'm trying to decide if I should cross the Straits today, or do I want to maybe wait? Am I going to get beaten up crossing the Straits of Juan de Fuca? So I'll show them how they can find the history of the wind, both wind gusts and wind speed over a period of time. And so that they can see within a period of time, you might have, if the wind is, there might be a period of time where the wind has been less than 10 knots. But there also are times this time of year when you can have gusts over 40 knots. And so we talk about how they can build their own comfort level and their own decision about what are they comfortable with handling in their boat in these situations. We'll also talk about the fact that they're not only interested in wave height, but they're also interested in the period of the wave. So I work with the Wagner Cruising Guide to lead a flotilla up the Inside Passage to Alaska every May and June. And on that trip, people learn pretty quickly that it's not enough just to get the forecast for the wave height, because a nice ocean swell that may be pretty high but has a long period is going to be a very different experience than something that has a very short period that's going to beat them up. So again, I'm using it more as a teaching tool, as bringing up data and information about our environment to kind of help get people familiar with what are the questions they should be asking about the weather before they go out. And I think, is that my last slide, Rachel? Oh, so feedback and suggestions. Yeah, I've got some feedback and suggestions. But Rachel, did you say, should we leave that for the working session, Rachel? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Yeah, Margaret, oh my goodness, this is fantastic, so much. And I'm really excited to get deeper into the feedback and suggestions, which you and I have already talked about. So I'm excited to get into that more deeply in the breakout session. So thank you so much.